But this afternoon, we're really lucky to have someone who might take us a bit further, to think beyond just lamenting to forms of action. We've got Rev Dr Barbara Glasson, who's a writer, a teacher, an activist, a theologian, a church leader, all sorts of adjectives that are both true, but testament to the diversity of places in which she sought both to live out and explore what peace means today. So, thank you very much for coming to join us, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say today.
Thank you very much for your welcome. It feels very scary to have to be all those things in one person. Clearly, it's just me. My younger son, who towers over me quite considerably, not difficult, of course, to tower over me, did look down on me at one point when I was going to Pakistan and say, "Mum, you do know you can't change the world on your own, don't you?" And I said, "No, nobody ever told me that." So it's lovely to be with you, and I'm very aware that within this room there's a wealth of experience, a wealth of understanding, a wealth of knowledge, and many of you have travelled the path of peace a lot longer than I have, and bring great wisdom to our shared gathering. So I'm looking forward to sharing with you and hearing from you, and I hope that there'll be plenty of time for questions which I probably won't be able to answer, and for shared discussion where other people can have a go at answering the questions. As John has indicated, I've been writing, started writing during lockdown, and continued to write on the subject of peace is a doing word. Those of you that did any English at school will know that a doing word was the way we described a verb. Yes. Yeah, a verb is a doing word. I wanted to explore what it means for us to think about peace as a verb, not just as a thing that we aspire to, something that would be lovely to have, but we're not quite sure what it is. In the book, I've written a series of poems and stories and asked a series of questions in the way of a way of life. I don't know, those of you who are members of the Northumbria community will know, or the Iona community will know, that there are books which kind of take us through the day, help us to pray our way through the day and through the year. And that's what I'm trying to do in the writing in the book. And so I've tried to use different styles, different stories, and different ways in for people to engage with that. And my PowerPoint is just some of those poems, prayers, reflections. I was told off, when I was president of the Methodist Conference, I was told off for writing something that I thought was a prayer, and somebody said, "No, Barbara, that's not a prayer, it's a poem." And I honestly thought that God could work that out without me. So this is either a prayer or a poem. So let's just take a moment to be quiet, and then I will read these words. Show us this most excellent way, sparks of glory in the ordinary, glimmers of hope in the melancholy, glints of prayer in the drudgery, surprise of change in the mystery. Show us this most excellent way. Amen. Amen. If it's a prayer. I'll leave the next one there, and you can, if you're distracted from what I'm saying, you can look at the words. I begin with a quote from Colossians, which is this: "Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body we are called to peace, and be thankful." It's Colossians 3:15. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body we are called to peace, and be thankful. Peace is one of those words, I think, like mission or spirituality or community, which kind of feel good, but we generally don't know what they are. We want them, we aspire to them, but we can't quite pin them down. There are plenty of self-help groups that enable us to pursue our inner peacefulness, to practice mindfulness or yoga or meditation or reflection, a promise that promises a stress-free existence, if I could say it, with the appropriate use of time and energy. And in them we are encouraged to centre ourselves, to empty our minds, to focus on our inner core, and somehow or other to have an inner zenness, which will bring both well-being and peace. But even if we were to spend every day in the lotus position, or in deepest contemplation, or in the swimming pool, this would not change the world around us in any significant way. Me being tranquil and centred is not going to sort out Ukraine or Somalia or Myanmar. On the contrary, it would be to neglect them. It would be to neglect them for the well-being of myself over theirs. We consider that we have lived the last 50 years or so in peacetime in this country, but in that same time being at peace, we may just have exported war. We may have exported our conflict offshore. We have certainly exported arms to the seemingly unscrupulous benefit of the British economy, and we continue to do so. Surely peace is more than simply not having conflict. Have we inhabited a false peace, where we have deluded ourselves that our domestic prosperity is not at the expense of others? And then, if there were no war anywhere in the entire globe, no conflict, no arms, no weapons of mass destruction, would there actually be peace? I suspect not, because peace is much more than the absence of war. Rather, it is predicated on justice and equality and on environmental sustainability, and dare I say it, on love. Not just love for ourselves and our neighbours, but love for our enemies. And if all this wasn't complicated enough, the verse from Colossians refers to the peace of Christ. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. That would be the Jesus that said, "Think not that I have come to send peace on earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword. For I am come to set a man of variance against his father, and the daughter against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against the mother-in-law." Yeah, that Christ, that Jesus, that really helps. So in this talk, I'm going to circle around that word peace, using the verse from Colossians. And it's not my intention to answer the questions, but rather to look at it from a number of different angles, to look at it from here and there and over there, and set some more rascals running. I want to hook these reflections on the Colossians verse, but even in doing so, there is much more to be said. So, as I have a short time, we go onward. So here is a poem prayer. Between you and me, let there be peace. Between here and there, let there be peace. Between right and wrong, let there be peace. Between certainty and doubt, let there be peace. The deep peace of enough, the deep peace of together, the deep peace of sufficient, the deep peace of friendship, be ours, yours and mine, here and forever. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body you were called to peace, and be thankful. Let the peace of Christ rule in our hearts. Let's leave aside what we actually mean by the peace of Christ for a moment and look at the imperative that peace should rule in our hearts. This is a message to the early Christian community, and it seems to be an instruction concerning the way we live as followers of Jesus. We would expect these first disciples to greet each other with shalom or salam, peace be with you. But the injunction to let peace rule implies that this desire for peace is not something that can be uttered on the surface of things, a greeting before the real conversation commences. Rather, that peace has to be embedded right inside us on our hearts. Peace needs to rule in our hearts, to be engraved on our very way of being, the very essence of who we are. Peace is not simply an add-on, the icing on the cake, the postscript when we've done everything else. On the contrary, peace is the rule by which we should live. It is the essence of being a follower of Christ. Quite a bit of this letter is devoted to how one should live a godly way of life, how to avoid false teaching and how to be authentic in the faith. Whoever wrote this letter is exhorting those who might be confused by all these pressures and strains to put peace at the very heart of their being, peace at the very heart of our being. It's the essence engraved upon us. It is the hallmark of people of faith. But let's think for a moment of the word rule. In English, it can mean dominion, to conquer, to be in charge. Let Jesus be in charge. Let Jesus have dominion over us. But it also can mean to measure, a rule, a ruler. So peace could be the thing by which we measure our capacity for our hearts to love. The rule of the kingdom is not a rule book, but rather a measuring stick. Let everything we do be measured by the life of Jesus. Let peace measure us. Help me not to measure life by any standard other than the rule of peace and love. Give me the capacity to go the extra mile, to turn the other cheek, to draw circles of peace in the shifting sands of conflict. Help me not to measure others with a rigid rule, an unbendable rule, an unbreakable rule, but only by the span of your open, accepting, loving arms. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body you were called to peace, and be thankful. Peace, I believe, is a community endeavour. Because we are one body, the text says, that would be the body of Christ, the church. Having peace written on our hearts then is not simply so that we can be on the right side of God as an individual, but rather that we can live as a peaceful community. Peace is not simply a personal thing, it's about community, and it's about community because of the belonging together in the body of Christ. So that we can see that the peace of Christ and the peace of community overlap. We're not talking simply about what Jesus said about peace, but rather the life of the church being the body of Christ in the world. To be the body of Christ, we are called to be peacemakers, peace builders, to be at peace with each other in community. And this is vocational. We are called into it. We are called to peace. We are called to peace as individuals, and more importantly, that is how we are called to be Christ's presence at the church. We are creation's possible people, ligaments holding together, flexed and perplexed, speaking our puzzlements, flawed, lavish, broken, flailing around in thickets of uncertainty, yet wrapped in grace, clutching at the hem of love. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body, we are called to peace, and be thankful. And I think this is where that passage pivots. Supposing that instead of seeing the word peace as a noun, we read the verse as if it were a verb, to peace. We are called to peace. In other words, we don't see peace simply as an aspiration or a destination or an absence of conflict, but rather we see peace as an action, as a verb. I'm sure that in such erudite company there are linguists here that will tell me that that is not the meaning of the original text. Well, bother it, I'm unrepentant. I want us to suppose for a moment that in the letter to the Colossians, that's what was meant, to peace. That peace can be an action, it can be a movement. What difference would that make? Nearly 2 years ago now, I went to the refugee camps at Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. I'd been nearly 3 weeks in Myanmar to see the internally placed refugees there and to visit various communities, and then had to be flown out of the country and right round the edge in order to get to Cox's Bazar, where 1 million people, 1 million Rohingya refugees are encamped. They went from Myanmar in the night mostly, when their villages were being burnt. Motorbikes came into the villages, the fires were set, the men fled or were murdered, and the women took their children and carried the babies above their heads and walked up the river in order to reach relatives safely on the coast of Bangladesh. When they arrived there, they're right on the water's edge, and you can imagine 1 million people arriving has a huge environmental impact. The ground is very sandy, there are monsoons often, and that level of population has decimated really the ground and the stability of the land. In the middle of all that, I was taken to a small shack called Shanti Khana, a place of peace, where a Christian woman arrived every day. She came on a bus, she walked through the refugee camps, and she made there a place where women could come, Muslim women could come out of their very overcrowded shelters and rest, sleep, learn to sew, be together in more space and in a peaceful way. That small place of peace in the middle of what is hell on earth is both wonderful and challenging. Yes, of course, that place, the sacrifice of that woman, the money that has enabled that to be possible are all amazing sacrificial things. But where there is no justice, where those people are displaced with no hope of ever return, where there has been no listening or empowerment to speak of, then it is never enough. Peace and justice, they dance together. Bless me, I pray, with an unsettled spirit, that I will be restless until I see justice. Bless me, I pray, with a troubled mind, that a heartache for fairness will disturb my decisions. Bless me, I pray, with a determined body, that I will stand firm beside those who have need. Peace is a doing word. It's an action. It's a movement. It's an impetus. It's something that should make us disquieted as well as seeking a peace in our hearts. Surely Christians are called to live for justice. We have all seen the placards that say no justice, no peace, as if justice is a precursor to peace. And if we were to relate this to the plight of the Rohingya refugees, then clearly there cannot be peace until they are given back their homeland or a safe place to be. And I was so distressed to hear in the news, I don't know, something was going on about Partygate at the same time, so you may have missed it, but there was a fire in the Rohingya refugee camps not long ago now. So those traumatized people have had to leave their basic homes again and be rehomed again because of, I imagine, the trauma of that. Peace and justice, how can we square them? How can we hold them together? And nearer to home, could there ever be peace in Ukraine after this time of war, unless there's some kind of restorative justice? Clearly, peace is much more than simply the absence of war, but does it need justice before it can be achieved? It seems to me that justice and peace are uncomfortable bedfellows, and within both words lie the question, whose justice and whose peace? When Jesus said he was not going to bring peace but a sword, was he calling for this kind of resistance to the injustice of Roman occupation, that it would inevitably lead to a loss of peace? Did he mean that in order to get to the right place, to bring in the kingdom, it would be necessary to rebel and resist in such a way that peace would be lost in the process? Did he mean that? Surely peace without justice is a false peace, but the quest for justice does not always lead to peace. Is it sufficient for the Rohingya refugees to have a place of peace in a refugee camp following a genocide, knowing that they will never return and are at risk of environmental catastrophe? Is that peace? Is that the end point? So justice and peace often pull against each other, they swirl around each other, they contradict each other, and they both demand attention to and from each other. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body, we are called to peace, and be thankful. What an extraordinary thing to be alive. What a mystery to step into each morning as this blue planet, my home, turns once again towards her distant star for light and warmth. What an extraordinary gift is given to me. Even though this day seems complicated, relationships tangled, responsibilities too weighty, when I open my eyes in the morning, let my first thought be, thank you. Was your first thought this morning, thank you? My first thought was, I better go and catch a train. Thank you. In the middle of all this, we are called to be people of thanksgiving, to be thankful. In our vocation for peace, in our vocation for community, in the struggles between peace and justice, in all the questions that we live and can't resolve, we are called to be people that are thankful. Because we are one body, because we are not alone, because we are measured by peace, active for peace, struggling with injustice, then we are people of action, peace as a doing word. It's neither wishful thinking nor immediately achievable. It's neither a thing nor a destination. It's about a vocational way of being in the world. I had an argument with a man at Islamabad airport. I think that's a very good starting line for a story. I was at Islamabad airport and I simply wanted to be at home. If anybody here has been to Islamabad airport, you will know the desire to be at home after a number of weeks in Pakistan. I love Pakistan, but it completely melts my brain. Islamabad airport, you know, for the British, it's not orderly. And a white woman sitting on my own in the airport, I was quite noticeable. And a fellow passenger turned out on the plane to come back to Bradford, it turned out, decided that this was his moment to try and persuade me to become a Muslim. Call me grumpy, but I didn't, at that particular moment in time, particularly want to be a Muslim. And mostly I just wanted him to go away. Anyway, he talked to me, I would say at me probably for about half an hour. And then I made some comment, and then he talked to me for quite a bit longer. And then I said to him, in a moment of, I hope, peaceful resistance, tell you what, you give me 3 reasons why I should be a Muslim, and I will give you 3 reasons why I think you should be a Christian, and then perhaps we could just get on the plane. So after about another 20 minutes, he had presumably given me 3 reasons why I should be a Muslim, but I was, at that time, busy trying to think of 3 reasons why he should be a Christian. When it comes to listening skills, you know, you're not supposed to be thinking of your answer. Well, I was, I confess. I came up with 3, and people always ask me what the other 2 were, and they were something like, I believe in a living relationship with Jesus that transforms my understanding of community, something like that. It wasn't as erudite at the time. That I believed. What was the second? No, the third one was this: that Christianity is the only religion that exhorts us to love our enemies and pray for those that persecute us. And that's the only thing that'll change the world. When I got off the plane, Manchester, I thought, is Christianity the only religion that tells us to pray for our enemies? And pray for, love our enemies and pray for those that persecute us. I had to phone a friend, not that day, but later. And you can contradict me if you know to the contrary. But I think it is. But even if it isn't, I do believe that's the only thing that will change the world. I think that's why I am a follower of Jesus, because he's given us this difficult thing to do, this transformative thing to do, to love our enemies and pray for those that persecute us, even when they pee us off, when they get up our nose, when they're driving us to drink. Do you know, even when all that is going on, to love them anyway, pray for them anyway, because that, I believe, is the only thing that will ultimately make the difference. And fortunately, we don't have to do that on our own. We do that in community. We do that in a community where peace is our measure and our rule, gives us the space and the gradation of how we are with each other, the room to be together. This is our vocation. God calls us into it, to be peacemakers, to be peace bearers, to live it, to share it, to seek it. And peace is a doing word. It's something that we do as communities, as individuals, as countries. We need to do every day. And in all that, even in all that, there's a call to be thankful. And this last prayer poem, I bring with John in mind. I don't even know if he's in the room, but he's a small baby. He has a small baby. He's not is a small baby. He has a small baby. Okay. Bless all who pace the floor this night. Hold babes in arms or restless thoughts. Bless those who stare at stars this night. Hold distant loves or shattered dreams. Bless all who curse the dark this night. Hold angry thoughts or broken hearts. Bless us with peace and more this night, with constant grace, with love's insight. Amen. I believe we have time for reflections in the room, and then you will time us, John. I'm aware we have people online. If they want to type questions in chat, then we can, I think, bring those into the conversation as well. I'm also aware, John tells me that men have spoken more than women in the questioning, questions so far. So, yes.
I wonder if we could take your challenge at the end there and all undertake to pray for Vladimir Putin at the moment. I'm serious.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And to do it publicly in church.
Yes.
It's really hard, isn't it? It gives us trouble. Yeah.
It's we've got a notice as you go to our foyer that says, you know, please pray for Ukraine, and I almost wrote underneath that, but but courage family.
Take the courage back and do it.
I'll do it.
Yes, I'm always aware that our news is filtered. We're only hearing certain stories. There are, you know, stories always take a side or always nuanced, aren't they?
Can I just say something? I read the book about Putin. No, the other one.
About Donald Trump.
Donald Trump. About his niece. If only you could read it. What a damaged man. No love in his childhood at all. And I wonder if Putin is a damaged person like that.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. I don't know if it's helpful, but when Jesus said, "I come not to bring peace but a sword," he gave a very specific example of what he meant. And it wasn't, if we drive the Romans into the sea with that sword, then we'll have peace and justice. He said, "I've come to set father against son, mother against daughter, mother-in-law against daughter-in-law." And that says very clearly what he was attacking was the imbalances of power in the family. It doesn't mean he was only talking about the family, but it does mean he wasn't talking about a physical sword or a rifle. He was talking about attacking unjust power arrangements. And if you think, well, maybe he said it but didn't mean it, just look at the brusque way he treated his own mother.
Yeah, discuss.
Before that. When she came to the door, he said, "That's not my mother. People in here are my mother."
Barbara, I was struck from your reading from Colossians, we are called to peace. Have you got any reflections on whether pacifism is a specific calling only on certain individuals and that we will never have a world of peacemakers?
You mean we're called certain people are called as individuals to be pacifists or peacemakers and others aren't? Well, think of the Beatitudes. We might be able to pull out those different callings for individuals, can't we? My thinking is that we are all called to peace in some way, that it's the heart of what the kingdom is about. But I recognise that's open for interpretation. What's your take, Angie?
It's interesting because I have, and I've reflected on this before, I have thought perhaps we are called as individuals. But when you just, I know I'm only taking a little phrase out of Colossians 3:15, but when it's like, we are called to peace, it sounded a more embracing call.
Well, I kind of heard they were having a squabble.
Yeah, probably.
As all churches, you know, where two or three gather together, there's a squabble going on. And that it was, come on, get back to the heart of who you are, sort of exhortation. That's what I kind of hear within that. Interesting. I'm currently teaching pastoral theology at Queen's, as you know, and we were talking, I can't remember what subject we were talking about, but we have a number of students of African heritage. And when I was talking about pastoral theology, I was talking about how we take care of individuals within the church, you know, in funerals, baptisms, that sort of thing. How do we look after the sick? That was my kind of framework. But when the African heritage students were speaking, they were talking about community all the time. It was a completely different starting point. Their starting point for pastoral care was, how do we care for the community? How are we, family, community, church, together That was the beginning of the conversation. And our cultural heritage, because we've grown up with capitalism and individualism and those sorts of aspirations, pushes us towards an individual interpretation of text, doesn't it? Whereas, and it would be interesting in a multicultural group to hear what that calling sounds like. We are called to peace, you know, from a different heritage. How do we enable community to be peaceful? And I mean, I've worked in interfaith relationships for a long time, and when you apply for grant funding, we're always, you know, you've got to say, how is this community cohesion? I hate the phrase cohesion. Because actually, when we're making community, we're making peace, aren't we?
Yeah.
But you can't justify a grant funding by saying, well, we didn't have a war in Bradford, you know. Can you? You can't say what didn't happen. But actually, that's what you're doing. Your community cohesion is actually, you know, in my faith terms, is actually making peaceful communities, because we building relationships, getting to know each other, understanding, listening to nuance and contradiction of the story. So that's a bit of a divergence, but I think it. I mean, like all calling, I think it is an individual thing on our hearts. For some people, that's it, isn't it? For others, it's a way of being together. I don't know, other views in the room?
I wonder whether it's something to do with the sort of congregational model of church as well, which I think personally I've been understanding more that there are other models of church other than the congregational model, but perhaps there is something here about an individual congregation becoming a congregation of peace. So it's not just individuals as lone voices within their churches, it's the whole congregation kind of turning to become a peaceful church.
Imagine putting that on your notice board, and imagine what that would be like. What that would really concentrate their mind, wouldn't it? Well, I can't tell Nellie that because, you know, we're a peaceful church. You know, but wouldn't it be amazing to be able to sort of have a congregation that named itself a peace-bearing, peace-living congregation?
It's in the same way that
Some churches have become eco-churches.
Yes.
You know, they've got the plaque up outside.
Yes.
We've become an accredited eco-church.
Yeah.
I'd love to see churches saying we are a church that corporately have espoused peace.
Quakers, I think, have led the way. Yeah.
across the Quakers, the Mennonites, the Brethren describe themselves as peace churches, as do other Calvinistic Methodists, the Presbyterian Church in Wales.
And the Quakers have really led the way on that. In my opinion, Quakers in the room. But there was some other question or comment. Yes.
But just also to this, having this label. So I'm a Mennonite.
Yes.
And I grew up in a Mennonite church, and it was a thing that was always there, but I didn't have the feeling it was very explicit until I grew up and was in an ecumenical realm and noticed the difference of how the teaching was compared to other churches. And so just the label on the door is probably not going to change the church. And also being a Mennonite, I can tell you, not all the Mennonites, you know, we don't have the, like, in Germany we say we didn't rent peace for us. So it's about this, like, recommitting to this lifestyle, you said, being thankful, starting with yourself. And from Germany, there are actually some of the mainstream Protestant churches that have labeled themselves as peace church. They said, we want to become a peace church and be on this path. And it's been going on, and it continues to be a conversation in the church. How does that look? And now with the war in Ukraine, you had earlier that the question that does this now ask new questions to our peace theology or not?
Yes.
And that peace theology is not only about peace times, but rather about these hard times.
Yes.
And so these conversations and, being individual in a community and how this works together is a continuous task and question.
That's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And of course, wanting peace doesn't mean to say we avoid, there's no conflict. It's how we manage conflict. And conflict is a way of being human, isn't it? It would be very dull if we all agreed all the time. except if everybody agreed with me and that. Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah. Actually, what you were saying just then about conflict reminds me that our sisters and brothers in Palestine, the FOR branch WIAM, used to call themselves the Palestine Conflict Resolution Centre. They now call themselves the Palestinian Conflict Management Centre, because they say some conflicts don't want resolving, and you're managing to see that they're dealt with peacefully, but the conflict is there, and you know, sort of trying to resolve it, or pretending you can resolve it is.
What about this? I mean, this sort of dance between peace and justice. Yeah. Yes.
So just to bring up that point, I work for an organisation called Place for Hope that works with churches and faith-based communities around understanding themselves and around conflict. And I think it's a really important point you make. We discern between conflict management, which is trying, if you think about our children, trying to separate them so that the violence of conflict doesn't escalate, and the resolution being is there a way forward together. But we talk about conflict transformation, I'm sure many people in this room do, that, and it brings back to the point that you were making, Barbara, about justice, that the long-term conflict transformation, it's not enough to think of a way forward. Unequal relationships, unjust systems need to be taken into account. And we often do mediation for escalated conflicts in church settings and community settings. And often it stops at the resolution level because there's a time element. But if, and what we see again and again, is if those structures and those relationships have not been addressed, we will see the same conflicts come back. And you just reminded me then, if we're saying we're only going to manage it, we're just trying to stop the violence from getting worse. But resolution in such an entrenched place, it's almost impossible without the transformational issues to it.
Thank you. I think are we on time?
Comment from online.
Comment from online. Sorry.
Then I think yeah. So online.
So Dave Pybus has said, do people recognise the idea of Christ's peace being about our individual inner peace with God? ? Then almost in brackets, it worries me that that could be a cop-out from doing anything. Close brackets. Over to you.
Yes, I'm all right with Jesus, thank you.
And I think we did hear this morning Sam talk quite strongly about how individualised faith can be, and think about even things like tackling climate change. People want to change their light bulbs, but so long as they shop in the right place, have the right electricity, the buck stops there. And maybe we do the same with peacemaking. If I'm okay, but we've not spent the time in community, then actually have we even begun to do it? What's your thoughts based on your different experiences?
Yes. I mean, I think it's both and, isn't it? It comes back to my son's comment, you can't change the world, Mum. Well, he's right at one level, isn't he? I mean, I can't change the whole world on my own. That's not going to stop me trying. But if that's at the expense of my own well-being and my own family peace and my own individual centeredness, then actually I become useless in all dimensions. So, and I think it's interesting, when I was writing the book, I actually, in that process of daily writing a prayer or a poem or thinking of a story, I actually got to a different place within myself, which was transformational, which was quite, it shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. That kind of, I'm living peace, I'm intentionally doing this day by day. Oh, I've got to write another prayer or a poem, the publishers are waiting, kind of thing. But so that was important, but not to a place of complacency, of I've cracked this now, I know how to do it, but rather keep the impetus for being able to change the world and be a rebel and stand up for things either locally or internationally where I need to speak out, and even knowing that in the speaking out I might not make any difference, but you know, keeping that imperative. That.
But do you have to sacrifice some of your inner peace? Because if you go back to your previous poem, the one about something about restless heart.
Yes. I wonder if they're contradictory.
Yeah, that's what I'm just
Yeah.
toying with that.
Yes. Yes. I mean, people have said to me on occasion things like, when will you settle down, Barbara? Do you get these comments? Do you get these comments? I'm thinking, why would you ever think I was going to settle down? Or do I even understand the concept settle down? Because I think there's maybe just my nature, but there is something about the challenge of faith and the exploration of faith that actually pushes you into the next question, into the next unsettlement. What's the word? Off-balanceness. I know I've lost my English now, but there is something about that momentum, isn't there? That the kingdom is never. It's always just over the horizon and is yet to come. And yet we have this sort of Benedictine call to stability and centeredness and being present and engaging, you know, being earthed. And it's a both and, I think. I mean, tell me. Yes.
Yes, Thich Nhat Hanh writes about this, and he says a lot of us are appalled by what's happening in the world and want to change it, and we put a lot of effort into it. But we get burnt out and become useless unless we're also cultivating that deep inner peace. So for him it's not an either or question.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. There was a comment here, wasn't there?
Yeah, it's going back to kind of that question about justice, and I think one of the most kind of challenging parts of the talk that you gave for me was that question about whose justice do we do. So a lot of my background is looking at kind of like how we rebuild post-ethnic conflict and post-genocide. And what you'll find is when justice is done then, it's often done very much at an international level to fulfil some kind of international mandate. And actually what's left out then a lot of the time is the victims on the ground on both sides of the conflict who feel like they get no justice done, even though like justice could be said to have been done because we put all these bad people behind bars and the Hague has done all this kind of work. But actually at the community level, that often actually isn't addressed, and that just leads, I think, to less reconciliation and actually more divide and more upset. And I worked with a very inspiring man a few years ago who'd done a lot of work with Kurdish communities post Saddam Hussein's death sentence, because they felt they'd had no justice because he never answered any crimes that had happened to them. And I think that's a really important thing to reflect on, because often I think people will say, oh, justice has been done, when actually, who has it been done for? Because actually a lot of the time, those communities on the ground haven't felt any kind of justice and there's been no reconciliation.
Yes. I have a linguistic theory that there's a link between grief and grievance, and that if we don't address grief and lament, then what happens is grievance or worse, violence. And you see that just locally as well, don't you, where people feel they've taken umbrage over something. They may not express it there, but if that grief is unresolved, then it's likely to come out as a grievance somewhere else. We see that in church, I think, all the time. And taking time to grieve and lament. I think we see it now in post-COVID, probably. There's a whole package of unresolved grief, isn't there? And what we're seeing now, we're seeing grievances surface, aren't we? And I mean, it's one of Barbara's unproved theories, but I think there is a link, linguistic link, you know, between those two words, which is also an emotional link. How are we doing, John? Oh, 5 minutes left. He's learning sign language. So 1 or 2 more comments, if you have them, or we can just have some quiet.
Can you give a quick comment about the community thing? That's reminded me of when after I finished university, I did some voluntary teaching work in Nepal. And one of the frustrating things was that they would always copy each other.
Right.
And then after a few weeks, kind of the penny dropped. They weren't copying each other because they were cheating. It's just the whole of the village life, as was in a village rather than in Kathmandu, was geared towards them working together to solve a problem. So, just a little aside. Sadly, they also had no concept of what wasn't biodegradable, so it was kind of trying to explain to them how kind of the sweet wrappers that they just chucked on the ground needed to actually be properly disposed of. Well, so it's just being culturally aware.
Yes. I'd love to see that working in an English school where we just say, well, we work as a community, we've all got the same answer for our sons.
Yeah, we can work out who copied from you.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. You suddenly see
a whole new world view, don't you, when you have those sorts of experiences, like with my Zimbabwean heritage students. I suddenly had to rewrite the whole course, you know, in my head, because I'm teaching as with an individualistic starting point, and that's, you know, there is more to life than that. It's just my indoctrination by capitalism and the culture that I've been brought up in. So when the theological students come out as, well, maybe they'll just all copy their exam questions and yeah. I think it's probably where we're at, John. We included people online.
Yep.
Yeah.
Dave, who asked you the question, says, it's useful to pray and meditate on our individual peace with Christ, which passes all understanding, and then be able to act as disciples or even apostles in the world. Let's get together and get the world turned upside down.
Yeah, great stuff.
Yes.
He then managed an upside down smiley. I have no idea how that happened.
Show off.
The rest made sense.
Show off.
Barbara, thank you so much. That was absolutely brilliant.